a great day to crochet, especially here in New River Valley, Virginia. My question to you today is, have you ever gotten tired of all the unsightly gaps that are left at the end of each row when you're working tall stitches? There is a way to fix that so you have a very nice full edge on your blankets or straight edges. Come on inside with me and I'll show you an alternative stitch called stacked singles. So here are two sample pieces that I worked up using the same yarn, same hook size, which was very curious to me because when I used the stacked method for my turning chain over here, you can see that it turned out just a little bit shorter than the 5 rows sample of a normal traditional chain 3 at the end and turn sample piece. But you can see here that doing it the traditional way, getting to the end of the row, chaining 3, turning, leaves these gaps. If you can see that right here, especially on the first one. Now that one cannot be solved unless you could do probably a linked stitch between these first 2 stitches, but that's a whole nother video. So in doing the stacked turning chain, this gap will always be there unless you link it to your first double. But from there on out, every other row or at the end of every row, you're going to have this gap wherever you have chain 3. The reason that it gaps is because the chain stitches that you are working are thinner than the actual width of a double crochet, which then leaves this gap. And this is especially prevalent when your turning chain counts as a stitch. It's going to leave this big gap. If your turning chain does not count as a stitch, then of course you would chain 1 or 2 and make another double, work a double crochet in that same stitch, and then the bulk of your turning chain plus your first double crochet stitch actually will help fill in this gap. But again, if your turning chain counts as a stitch and you will not be placing another stitch in that turning chain stitch, then it's going to leave a gap. If you can imagine the entire side of a blanket with all these gaps showing. Plus, if you come back and want to put a border on the outside of it, it's a little, it's going to make your gaps a little bit bigger depending on how you work your border stitches into the sides of these chains. You know, whether you go in, work into the space or work into one of these chains, it kind of will pull on that chain and actually make your gapping worse. So how do we fix that? Well, we get rid of the traditional method and we take a look at stacking, which there are several methods. I mean, you can Google it on YouTube or whatever and find all kinds of methods that you can use. But today I'm focusing on what they call the stacked. And this will eliminate your gaps because you are creating in a sense, creating a turning chain that is the same width or approximately the same width as the double crochets that are next to it. And again, the only one that you will really have showing will be the initial first row when you turn to work your first row of double crochets. And there are methods that can fix that as well. So let's look at how to work this stacked turning chain so we can eliminate our gaps. So here I've worked up my first row of double crochets. I have 10 in a row counting this turning chain. Okay, so I have 10. And normally at this point, we would chain 2, chain 3, turn, and then place a stitch in the next stitch after we turn. But of course, we've already seen how that leaves a gap. So instead of chaining 2 or chaining 3, depending on what the pattern tells you to do, what we're going to do is we're not going to chain anything. We're actually going to turn our work, okay, rotate it, and this very first stitch where my hook, this loop is coming out of this very first stitch. Let me see. Right here. So right where my loop is coming out, in that stitch right there is where we want to insert our hook. And we are going to work a single crochet right there in that very first stitch, what they would normally refer to as the turning chain stitch, okay? Bottom of the turning chain. So there's one single. Now, we know that turning chains serve a purpose. It brings the height of our next row to the height of the stitch we're creating. In this case, we are working double crochets. So one single is not going to be the height of a double crochet. We have to stack another single crochet on top of this one that we just made. If you look closely at the stitch that I just created or that I just worked, you have two loops. You have the two legs, this leg here and the one on the left. We are going to insert our hook behind and through this leg on the left to create our next single crochet. So insert under that leg, pull up a loop, and pull through two to close the stitch. Now we have a stitch, two singles stacked on top of each other approximately at the same height as my other double crochets. All of this takes the place of your very first double crochet of this row, okay? Counts as your turning chain and your first stitch. Now we can continue working our double crochets across the row. Okay, and when you get to the end, don't be fooled. Don't forget to put one in this initial turning chain that you made on your very first row, because if you count your stitches, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I need 10. So don't forget to go back and to include your 10th double in that turning chain, that initial turning chain. All right, so now we have 2 rows of double crochet using the stacked method for our turning chain on that first row. Let's do it one more time. So instead of chaining 2 or 3 here and turning, we're just going to turn, work a single in that very first stitch, and now we're going to work another single by inserting our hook behind the left leg of that stitch we just made and working another single. So that's my stack. Now we work into the very next stitch, a double crochet, and we will finish the row across. So from my 10th stitch, the stack that I made, this stack turning chain that I worked on the previous row, it has a head, just like a normal stitch. You have your front loop and your back loop, and so that's where your last stitch of the row is worked. And there you have it. It's that simple. Then, as you can see, there's no gaps. It's going to be easier to come back around and place your edging if you so choose to put a border on your work. And you have nice straight edges. You don't have all this gappiness to your blankets or your washcloths or anything that you need a straight edge work.